This is Group 9, and our group focused on e-cigarette smoking. So today we are presenting an analysis of e-cigarette smoking using our survey results. Hi, I'm Marissa, and I'm going to start by introducing our group members. So first we have Katie Brinkman. She's a microbiology major and epidemiology minor. She's a second-year student. Next, we have Sarah Feeney. She's a public health sociology major and geography minor. She's also a second-year student. Next, we have Shreya Sunkam. He's an environmental public health major and also a second-year student. And then me, Marissa Perico, a public health sociology major and cultural anthropology minor, and I'm also a second-year student. And now we're going to go into a background on the use of e-cigarettes in the United States. E-cigarettes were first introduced to the market around the year 2007. Since then, e-cigarettes have grown wildly popular, and according to the CDC, they are the most prevalently used tobacco product for youths. E-cigarettes contain the highly addictive nicotine, and users inhale on their device to receive it through a vapor. Other substances can be added to the juice cartridges that create the vapor. And here's the rundown on e-cigarettes. Studies are still being performed to determine the long-term health effects. While there is the possibility they can help smokers quit, often people use e-cigarettes in addition to smoking regular cigarettes. E-cigarettes are especially harmful to those who are non-smokers, especially younger people because their brains are still developing. The vapor created by e-cigarettes can contain many harmful substances besides nicotine, including heavy metals, particulate matter, and cancer-causing chemicals. The market for e-cigarettes has grown tremendously since it was first introduced to the United States in 2007. E-cigarettes are made by many different brands and come in various shapes and sizes, as you can see on this slide. They can be rechargeable or disposable. All e-cigarettes have a heating unit and a place to store liquid. Not all e-cigarettes have the same level of nicotine. Our group's first research question was, is there a relationship between race and the use of e-cigarettes? The goal for this first research question is to explore the possible relationship between race and the use of e-cigarettes. Our group was interested in seeing whether or not there was a trend within our sample linking race to different proportions of e-cigarette use and possibly different habits. This research question only scratches the surface of investigating e-cigarette trends and is in no way implying one race is more likely or predisposed to e-cigarette use. Our second research question was, is there a relationship between alcohol consumption and the use of e-cigarettes? This research question aims to evaluate a connection between alcohol consumption and the use of e-cigarettes. A broader question would be, are there certain habits that have a higher proportion of e-cigarette users? This question is partially based off of personal experience noticing possible trends in e-cigarette use at Ohio State. Our third and final research question was, is there a relationship between the use of e-cigarettes and students' ability to focus? The goal of this research question is to begin to investigate whether e-cigarette use has effects on other aspects of users' lives, specifically their ability to focus. Do students who use e-cigarettes have a harder time focusing in school? Our group wanted to investigate this relationship and see if there was any correlation.
Hi, so my name is Shreya Sunkam, and I'm going to be talking about the methods part of the presentation. So I'm going to be talking about where the data came from and how the data was collected. So the main target population that we're trying to generalize all our results to is all Ohio State University undergraduate students. And so the survey was sent out to undergraduates specifically. So obviously the results cannot be generalized to any graduate students or any high school students who may be attending the Ohio State University, but we're just looking at the undergraduate population as a whole. So how was our survey exactly generated? Well, the survey was generated using a website called Qualtrics. And basically, we first identified all the research questions that we want answered in the grand scheme of things. And then we started to narrow down certain questions we could ask that would help us get data on to answer those questions. So we asked many different questions in a variety of styles, including Likert type questions, multiple choice questions, open-ended questions, select all that apply questions. And so from this data, it's from these questions actually, it's easy to get a good understanding of the data that we're working with. So the survey was sent out using various platforms of social media, and that includes Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, GroupMe, group chats, any kind of interactions we have using social media with other people. We sent the survey link out on those and asked if anyone wanted to participate in our survey. And so we also, for the people that didn't have any social media or we couldn't contact directly by phone, we talked to them in person and asked if they would fill out our survey. And so we got all our data using those kinds of distribution methods. So there wasn't exactly any specific recruitment method that we used. We just kind of sent out the surveys as mentioned before, and our participants responded if they were interested and if they were able to respond, and we kind of collected the data like that. So the first question that we strive to answer in this project is there a relationship between race and the use of e-cigarettes? So how we can analyze what test to use is by breaking down the question into what kinds of variables are in it. So race and e-cigarettes are both categorical variables. So we're gonna have to either use chi-square test or Fisher's exact test. And when we plugged the data into R, there was a warning when we used a chi-square test. So that's how we determined that Fisher's exact test had to be used for this question. The second question that we strive to answer in our project was, is there a relationship between alcohol consumption and the use of e-cigarettes? So how we can determine which test to use is by looking at the variables in the question or the variable types in the question. And so alcohol consumption was measured by the number of days a participant consumed alcohol per week, which was determined to be a continuous variable. And e-cigarette use was obviously a categorical variable. So when we have one categorical variable and one continuous variable, the best test to use would be a two-sample t-test. So that's how we determined that a two-sample t-test should be used in this question. The third question we strived to answer in this project was, is there a relationship between the use of e-cigarettes and a student's ability to focus? And again, let's look at what variables are present in the question. Use of e-cigarettes was categorical, and a student's ability to focus was also categorical. So again, we're either going to use the chi-square test or Fisher's exact test. And this time, there was no warning message when the data was plugged into RStudio, so the chi-square test was the best test to use for this question. So the primary software used for answering our research questions was RStudio. And so all of the data was analyzed on this software and all of the statistical tests were conducted on this software as well. Qualtrics may technically not be counted as a software, but it is also worth mentioning because it was used to generate all the questions and to generate the survey, which was sent out to the participants. And so the data was collected mainly using Qualtrics. So that's all there is for the method section. I'm going to hand this off to Sarah now, who will be talking about the results.
My name is Sarah, and I'm going to be discussing the results of our study with you today. So jumping right into sample demographics, you can see that we had a total of 86 people that completed our survey. And the majority of these students were white, that's about 89.5%, as well as female, which is also 89.5% of our sample. The mean age of participants was 19.8 years, and the majority of students that were surveyed were OSU students, though we did have 5 out of those 86 that were not. So some additional questions that we explored for our hypotheses tests had to do with e-cigarette usage, alcohol usage, as well as ability to focus. So we found that 13 out of 86, which is 15.1% of our sample, did say that they use some form of e-cigarettes, while 84.9% do not. The median number of days of the week that students drank alcohol was about 2 days, and most students reported good as their ability to focus as comparison to poor, fair, or very good. On average, we found that students estimated that about 37.4% of their peers use e-cigarettes, and we did find that the median of this data was 40%. So moving on to our first hypothesis test, we were looking at the research question of, is there a relationship between race and the use of e-cigarettes? So these are both nominal variables, and we ended up performing a Fisher's exact test to explore the association. Our null hypothesis was that there's no association between race and e-cigarette use in the population, and our alternative hypothesis was that there is an association between race and e-cigarette in the population. We found that our p-value was 0.5264, so we failed to reject the null hypothesis for this test, meaning that there was not sufficient evidence to say that there is a relationship between these two variables. For our second hypothesis test, we were exploring the potential correlation between alcohol consumption and the use of e-cigarettes. So because this is a nominal variable, as well as the days of the week that students drink alcohol, which is a continuous variable, we used a 2-sample t-test. And so the null hypothesis for this test was that the mean alcohol consumption of those who do use e-cigarettes is equal to the mean alcohol consumption of the students that do not use e-cigarettes. And the alternative was that these two population means are not the same. So when we performed our test, we got a p-value of 0.0867, which is larger than the standard cut point of 0.05. So we were not able to reject this null hypothesis either. So there was not a significant association between these two variables according to our test. And finally, for our last hypothesis test, we were wondering if there was a relationship between the use of e-cigarettes and a student's ability to focus. So for these two nominal variables, we did a chi-square test. So these null and alternative hypotheses were very similar to our Fisher's exact hypotheses. Our null was that there is no association between e-cigarette use and the ability to focus. And the alternative was that there is an association between these two variables in the population. So when we performed our chi-square test, we got a p-value of 0.553, which once again is larger than the standard alpha level of 0.05. So we failed to reject this null hypothesis as well. So in the end, we did find that we failed to reject all of our null hypotheses for our hypothesis tests.
My name is Katie Brinkman, and I will be finishing this discussion on this study with the conclusions. Let's return to test number 1, which I will remind you is an exploration between the relationship of someone's race and their usage of e-cigarettes. We found that there is not a significant association between someone's race and their usage of e-cigarettes based on the Fisher's exact test, whose p-value was 0.5264. 13, or 16.9%, of respondents who were white reported that they use e-cigarettes, while 0, or 0%, of respondents who were of other races reported that they use e-cigarettes. We made a few assumptions in order to use this test. First was a random representative sample, which we violated slightly because of our use of a convenience sample, which may not have been the best representative sample of all undergraduates at OSU. The second assumption we made for this test was independent observations, which holds true for this. And lastly, mutual exclusivity, which means that respondents could only be a part of one group, which also holds true because a respondent can only be white or of another race, and they can only use cigarettes or not use e-cigarettes. Let's move on to test number 2, which was an exploration on the relationship between alcohol consumption and e-cigarette usage. We found that there was not a significant difference in the mean number of days e-cigarette users drink alcohol and the number of days non-e-cigarette users drink alcohol. E-cigarette users drink alcohol approximately 2.230 days of the week, with a standard deviation of 0.725, and non-e-cigarette users drink alcohol 1.692 days of the week, with a standard deviation of 1.076. And this was all based on a 2-sample t-test whose p-value was 0.0867. The assumptions that were made for this test were, again, random representative sample, which our convenience sample also violates. Independent observation, which holds true for this. We also made the assumption that there was a normal distribution in each group, which we found that e-cigarette users' alcohol consumption was left skewed. And then we also made the assumption that the variances in each group were equal, which is also violated because the variances of each group differ by 0.351. We'll discuss test 3, which explains the relationship between e-cigarette usage and a student's ability to focus. We found that there is no significant relationship between the use of e-cigarettes and the student's ability to focus, based on a chi-square test whose p-value was 0.553. 4, or 30.8% of respondents who reported poor or fair focus were e-cigarette users. 8, or 61.5% of respondents who reported good focus were e-cigarette users. And 1, or 7.7% of respondents who reported very good focus were e-cigarette users. The assumptions that were made in order to use this test were, again, a random representative sample where a convenience sample violates this, and independent observations, which is held true for this test, and lastly, a large enough sample size, which is violated because even after we collapsed groups together, the cell count of e-cigarette users who reported poor or fair focus and e-cigarette users who reported very good focus, the cell counts are too low. I would like to finish our discussion of this study with some limitations and further testing that we would like to do. A first major limitation to our study is that our sample was conducted using convenience sampling. Our target population was undergraduate students at OSU, and to recruit a sample for our testing, we sent out the links via social media to our friends or other people we knew around school. Our sample is biased toward our friend group and other people we may know, and may not be the best representative sample of the entire population of undergraduates at OSU. Another limitation that is present is self-reporting. We asked our respondents to self-report their usage of alcohol, e-cigarette use, and their ability to focus, among other things. Even though our survey was completely anonymous, some respondents may have chosen to report levels of activity outside of their actual reality. If our sample population was larger, diverse, and not biased toward our personal connections, the test that we can conduct with this new sample could give us a better idea on the relationship of e-cigarettes and the lives of undergraduates at OSU.